Please be seated. Thank you everybody for coming out today to beautiful downtown Lynden on a sunny Saturday. It's nice to see that spring has sprung and there's that glowing orb in the sky. We have today, not me as a speaker, but we have all the way from LD19, Grays Harbor County, the beautiful town of Aberdeen, our state chair and LD19 representative. Please welcome to the microphone, Mr. Jim Walsh.
All right, well, thanks, Dan. I'm Jim Walsh. I'm the chairman of the Washington State Republican Party, was just elected about 6-7 months ago to that job. I'm also a state representative in Olympia for the 19th district, which is Aberdeen and coastal Washington. So I drive around a lot. But what we want to talk about today is what happened in the last few months, both in Olympia and statewide, and how that affects you and what's going on here. And it, to some degree, touches on that county initiative that you have, that Amy's got the petitions in the back you can sign. And more importantly, I think it affects a lot of just a sense of local control and local activism. That's something that Republicans in the state want to encourage everywhere. But let me start by saying that when I was elected to the position as state party chair last August, the most important thing I thought we needed to do was create a sense of winning, of momentum for common sense. I mean, it doesn't even have to be Republican specifically, just kind of not crazy, like common sense law, common sense public policy. There you go, I should stop. And so what we did when we started last fall, of course last year we had the local elections. You had local city council, mayoral races, and school board races last fall. And we decided at the state party to focus on those school board races for a couple of things. To help common sense conservative candidates get elected to school boards. Remember, those elections are nonpartisan, so the candidates don't declare Republican or Democrat. But we wanted to support reasonable people, common sense people, and that these days generally means conservative people politically. And so what we did was we identified 36 school board races around the state. They were geographically spread all around. A couple up this direction, a bunch down along I-5 through the heavy population areas, some on the east side of the state, Tri-Cities area, Spokane area, Yakima area. And so we spread them around geographically. We also picked these 36 races to focus on based on areas that were not gimmies, that were not easy for a conservative to win. We wanted to find places where the candidate really needed the state party's help to win, to get across the line in November. And we contacted these 36 candidates, and they had to agree to want our help, and they pretty much all agreed to accept our help. And then it was a matter of finding out what they needed help with in their campaigns. And the most important thing they wanted help with, of course, was fundraising for their campaigns. And we didn't give them any money. We didn't write any checks. But we did help the candidates, almost all of them, identify donors, identify people to talk to in their areas. And that was based on public information about historical people who contributed to political campaigns in those areas. And we gave them some proprietary information that the state party has on voters and who votes a lot, who doesn't vote a lot. And from that information, we were able to help them create basically target lists of potential donors to their campaigns. And then we helped them too with basically letters, template letters they could use for fundraising, or talking point scripts for phone calls if they called somebody up. those phone calls, those cold calls to people are always tough to do. So we help them find ways to kind of break the ice and talk to people about contributing to their campaigns. And then some of the candidates, the 36, they wanted help with other things. Some of them wanted help with messaging, not just to donors, but generally on school issues and school boards and what to talk about at events and how to talk about it. And some needed help with things like yard signs. They didn't know how to design a yard sign that looked good. So whatever they needed, we helped them with. And then the main thing the party was interested in helping with, and the real reason we did all this, was getting out the vote in their areas. And that dovetailed with this idea of a practice called ballot harvesting that you may know about and may like or not like. We've decided that ballot harvesting is legal in this state. The other guys have been doing it for years, and we're kind of stupid not to do it ourselves, even though our party, by tradition, has not liked the idea of ballot harvesting. What is ballot harvesting? Well, ballot harvesting is identifying voters who are likely to be moderate or conservative and making sure they vote. They send their ballot back in this all mail-in ballot state. And contacting them, give a phone call, an email, knock on their door and talk to them, and make sure that they vote. And if they haven't voted, offer to go get their ballot and take it to the county auditor's office to be counted. You may have heard things in the news or seen, there have been a couple of documentary movies out that talk about this ballot harvesting, primarily in other states where in some cases it is illegal to do that, and making kind of a controversy and a scandal out of it. In other states it may be a controversy and a scandal. In Washington state it's completely legal and part of the mail-in, all mail-in ballot process we have here. Now, I personally am not a big fan of the all mail-in ballot system. I want to get back to in-person, one-day voting. But we have to get there, we have to win under the current rules. So I think we have to play by the rules, and to not do something to improve the turnout of our voters because we don't like the sound of it is kind of stupid. I think we need to play by the rules and we need to win by the rules. So we tested in these 36 school board races different approaches to ballot harvesting. Some we were more aggressive, some we were more laid back. In some cases we tested providing private ballot boxes, drop boxes, that we would put in primarily churches, but in some cases other like businesses, gun shops, other businesses where people could go and drop their ballot off. Now they're not mailboxes, and they're not county-run ballot boxes. They are privately run, privately funded ballot boxes, but in trusted locations where people feel comfortable dropping their ballot off. And we explain to the best ability we have to them, that voters, we are a private organization. We are doing this as a courtesy. We'll make an easy place for you to drop your ballot off, and then we promise we will, on a regular, daily, or every other day basis, we'll pick up those ballots and take them to the county to be counted. And then we tried other approaches. We tried sending canvassers out, doorbellers out to knock on the doors and say, have you voted? If you haven't, I'll stand here while you fill your ballot out and I'll take it to the county for you if you want. That's entirely legal in the state of Washington. Now, filling the ballot out for somebody, that's not legal. You have to let them complete their own ballot and sign it. I'm told some organizations actually fill the ballots out for people, but we don't do that because that's illegal. But we do offer to collect and deliver the ballots. So that's what ballot harvesting is. And we found in helping out those school board races last fall that those ballot boxes in trusted areas are very effective. People kind of like that. They're comfortable with that. So they can take their ballot to church and drop it off at a box, or they can take it to a store that they know and drop it off the box. That's pretty effective. The knocking on the door thing, it can work. Some people don't like it. They find it too invasive, so that's more of a mixed bag. But those private ballot boxes, they seem to work well. That's a comfort thing. People are comfortable with that. So in the end, I mean, our interest as the state party was in testing these different approaches out to see what would work in helping get out the vote. And frankly, with the fundraising and the messaging, what actually helps candidates win. I mean, what do they really need? What do they think they need, but maybe they're okay on? And we got a lot of good data on all of that, on how to help more effectively conservative candidates win their elections. And the good news was last November, 32 of those 36 candidates were elected to their school boards. It was very good. And as I said, these races, they weren't all gimme races. They weren't in like heavy red areas. They were competitive races. And that had a good effect beyond just those elections. The organization of school board members, school board directors around this state, goes by the acronym WASDA, the Washington Association of School Directors. And WASDA is a strange and interesting organization. If you're the member of a school board, do we have any school board members here? Anybody who's been?
Yes.
Yes, okay, a couple, good. Well, then you know WASDA, right? You have to join if you're a school board member. Now, there are a few places where they try to not join, but you have to, you're obligated to join WASDA if you're elected to a school board. And in the past, this organization, this WASDA, of all the school board directors in the state, has been very left-leaning. It's been very progressive. And they put forward a lot of recommended, curriculum material and studies. This is all for K-12 public schools. And some of this stuff has been very controversial. They also have a very unusual attitude in that they tell the newly elected school board directors especially, you've got to do what we say, you've got to follow, you've got to toe the line, or you could be personally held liable for bad things that happen. Which is partly true, but the way that they couch it to new school directors, school board members, they kind of exaggerate the risk in order to get them to be scared and kind of compliant with the group priorities. Whereas I believe, and most conservatives believe, school boards ought to be kind of fiercely independent and do their thing based on what local families and local taxpayers want in their schools and not be part of some big statewide machine. And in fact, our state law is very clear that school boards, locally elected school boards, have what state law calls broad discretionary power for determining the policies of the local schools. And broad discretionary power, that's the highest level of administrative power that our state law recognizes. It's the same power that the office of the governor has for many policy issues. And so when a school board, a locally elected school board, and the governor or the state superintendent of schools disagree on a policy point, on something you should do, they actually, in the eyes of the law, they are on equal footing. So the governor can't dictate to a locally elected school board what it has to do. Now, he can try, and the state superintendent can try, but if they went to court, the law says the school board and the executive positions are the same footing in the law and have the same authority. One can't tell the other what to do. Conversely, the school board can't entirely tell the governor to go pound sand because their power is equivalent. So the idea is they should be cooperative with each other to some degree in making policy. Anyway, this WASDA, the Organization of All School Board Members, which very left-leaning lately, has a growing conservative caucus within its membership. And these 32 members who were elected last fall, I don't know if all of them did, but almost all of them joined the conservative caucus within WASDA. And that conservative caucus, it's still a minority group within the school board organization, but it is becoming more influential. And they're not trying to hijack WASDA's priorities, they're just trying to move the frame back to the middle political. They know they're not going to win every policy debate that goes on in that group, but they want to win some. They want to bring the focus of the K-12 school policy making to the middle of the political spectrum, and they're having success doing that. And those of you who are members of WASDA will know this. Recently, the conservative caucus within the School Board Association had a major win. This WASDA, the organization, used to, when it came time to vote on policy proposals and other business of the association, used what's called weighted voting. And that meant that the school board directors from larger school districts with more enrolled kids had their votes counted in a weighted formula more than school board directors from smaller school districts with fewer kids. And this gave an inordinate advantage within their organization to larger school districts, which are often more politically left-leaning progressive school districts. So that the more progressive members had an advantage kind of in the parliamentary process of the organization. Well, the conservative caucus was able to negotiate within WASDA a change in its rules. They got rid of weighted voting. So every member of the organization has the same vote as every other member does. Now that doesn't give anybody an advantage, but it levels the playing field between smaller school districts and larger school districts. That will, I predict, be a policy win for more moderate and reasonable policy coming out of that organization going forward. I mean, we get to see completely how it'll play out, but it's a step in the right direction, I believe. And so that's a win on top of the win of getting some 32 people elected. We built on that small-ish win to another win that happened about the same time, a little bit later last year, and that had to do with these 6 initiatives to the legislature. A group of us got together, an informal kind of coalition of organizations, and before I was even elected state party chair, I drafted 6 initiatives to the legislature which changed 6 key policy points in the state law that had been real trouble in the last few years. They were new laws passed in the last 3 or 4 years that were really bad and needed to either be overturned or modified substantially. And the 6 initiatives, it's a little interesting. The initiative process in the state is as old as the state, and it really got going about 100 years ago in the 1920s. And Washington has been a leader in the country in using people's initiative. In our time, in recent years, the initiative process was identified largely with one individual, a guy called Tim Eyman. Many of you know Tim Eyman. And Eyman kind of became a champion and kind of almost a kind of celebrity on initiative issues. And most of his initiatives focused pretty clearly on specific kinds of tax reform, most famously $30 car tabs. He was the big champion of keeping car tab renewals at $30. Eyman was a controversial figure. It is still around. He courts controversy as a way of marketing his initiatives. He got into a major feud with the current state attorney general, a fellow by the name of Bob Ferguson. Remember that name? Very good. I'm in the right place. Thank you. So Ferguson and Eyman have been in court fighting each other for years. Initially, Eyman was kind of winning, but then the tide turned a bit and Ferguson started winning. And Ferguson has effectively decommissioned Eyman. In a series of legal settlements, Eyman has got to a place where he can't really effectively do initiatives anymore. I mean, and this may change later, but for the moment, he's not effectively running initiatives anymore, at least in this state. He does it in other states where Bob Ferguson is not the Attorney General. So nobody's been there to promote initiatives. So a couple of people tried to do it, and I, although I'm a state legislator, in my life as a citizen, I'm free to do a people's initiative too. I have to make sure that I don't use any of my resources as a legislator, my office, my assistant, any legal research. I can't use any of that. I have to do it all myself. But I know where to look because I've watched all the trouble made in the last few years, so I have some advantages over other people in drafting initiatives. So I drafted these 6 initiatives, and then we created a coalition of a couple of organizations. You may have heard of one, got most of the pub and did most of the work, a group called Let's Go Washington. They've got one guy called Brian Haywood is kind of the brains and the money behind that operation. But there were some other groups too. There was a group called Restore Washington. It was kind of a confederation, about 3 or 4 different organizations. And the 6 initiatives that I drafted that we all got together and supported did these 6 things. One of them restored police pursuits, the ability of police to chase criminals and criminal suspects on the basis of reasonable suspicion on the part of the law enforcement officer. Now that had been the law for 100 years in Washington. It was changed about 4 years ago. You may remember the George Floyd controversy out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. George Floyd was a guy with a criminal past, bad record, drug problems. He died while he was in police custody there in Minneapolis. The initial reports in the media were that police had killed him, that he had died because of a chokehold. Later it turned out that's not what happened. But the news, the media's first pass on it, was that the police had caused this man's death. A whole bunch of protests and riots happened everywhere, and a bunch of left-wing state legislators all around the country coordinated on passing bills that in various ways restricted what law enforcement could do in their states. We did that here in Washington. Those of us who are on the right of center in the legislature, we didn't agree with it. We thought they were bad ideas. But our friends on the left, they were certain this was necessary. And among the things they passed after those George Floyd riots was this restriction on police chasing bad guys. They changed the standard to a much higher, more difficult to achieve standard. And you've probably read or heard or seen the stories where police departments basically said, okay, we're not going to chase anybody because the standard for chasing them legally is high and complicated and weird. We're just going to tell our officers don't chase anybody. And this resulted in an increase in crime rates all around the state of Washington because nobody's chasing criminals anymore. We've seen the numbers higher in property crime rates, burglaries, car thefts have gone way up. You probably know people who've had cars stolen or they cut the catalytic converters off of cars because they're valuable for the metal in them. All those numbers up. The homicide rates are up, particularly in Seattle and Tacoma and the bigger urban areas. Murder rates and homicide rates way up. Seattle's now, I think it's had record homicides 2 or 3 years running. This is all, well, there are lots of reasons for it. But when you talk to law enforcement people, they'll tell you the main piece of it is the inability to chase, to pursue. So the first initiative restores the police ability to pursue bad guys. The second initiative creates what we call the Washington Parents' Bill of Rights. And what it's mostly about information. What it says is custodial parents or guardians, grandparents if they have custody, they have to know, they have to be told what's going on with their minor children. At school primarily, but also in some healthcare environments. Physical healthcare, mental healthcare, so a therapist, a counselor, treating a child, a minor child. They can't hide from the custodial parents what's going on. There have been some laws passed in the last few years that have allowed healthcare providers and some school officials, and in some cases law enforcement officers, either allowed or demanded that they withhold from custodial parents information about minor children. And what this initiative, the second initiative, does is say you can't do that. That a custodial parent cannot be lied to or withheld information from matters affecting their minor child. That initiative also says, as part of repairing that policy point, it makes the clear statement that parents are the primary stakeholders in children's upbringing, not the state, not anybody else. This is an important policy change. Now, it doesn't change everything. In this state, we still have what's called the mature minor doctrine, and that's the set of laws that say a minor child can receive certain kinds of medical care without parental permission. This applies particularly to abortion. So young girls who are legally minors can receive abortions without parental permission, but the parent can't be lied to about it. Under this new law, the parent would at least have to be notified what's going on or what's going on. Some of those laws also apply to minor children seeking psychotherapy and psychiatric care. Again, the parent can't stop the child from asking a counselor for help, but the parent can't be lied to about it. It can't be withheld from the parent if the child is receiving that help. And some of that help involves gender issues, involves the child having what is called gender dysphoria or gender confusion. The parent can't be kept in the dark about that. The parent has to know and be told by the caregiver or the institution the caregiver is associated with that the child is receiving this care. I believe that this is an essential reform because I believe almost all parents are loving and supportive of their children, even if the child is in crisis. There has been a prevailing sentiment in our state law that parents are not loving and supportive, that parents are by default abusive or neglectful of children, and that to me is just wrong. Of course there are abusive parents, that's not news, but most parents are not. And I think that initiative corrects that faulty assumption in the law. The other 4 initiatives out of the 6 have more to do with budget and fiscal reforms and tax reforms. One of them states in the law, something that most people think is already law, but it is not, that there will not be in the state of Washington any tax based on personal income. Now, most people think that's already state law here. It's not. You could have a state income tax in Washington, at least you could until recently, till now, with the initiative, but it would have to meet certain constitutional limitations on what it would be. This initiative says no, there will be no state income tax based on personal income. The other 3 are even more specific fiscal reforms. One repeals the Climate Commitment Act, the cap and trade tax scheme that's driven up gas and diesel prices and is now starting to drive up utility bills. Another one repeals the state's capital gains tax, which you might say, well, doesn't the income tax initiative cover that? No, because in our state, the capital gains tax is not considered an income tax. It's considered an excise tax. This is a legal fiction that our state Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, came up with to defend the capital gains tax. Everywhere else in the world, a capital gains tax is considered a type of income tax. Here in Washington, it's considered an excise tax, which is a tax on a transaction. So what the initiative says is, we don't care if it's an income tax or an excise tax or a duck, it's repealed, whatever it is. And the 6th, the final of the initiatives, doesn't repeal, but it makes opt-out a state payroll tax that funds a so-called long-term care benefit program that's run by the state. This so-called long-term care benefit program run by the state government is basically a type of nursing home benefit. So it pays for nursing home care, or in some cases the in-home care that's like nursing home care. So think like visiting angels and those services. So this benefit program pays for that kind of those services. But it's a bad program. People hate it. It's relatively expensive, and it's paid for with a payroll tax. So the money is out of your paycheck before you get the paycheck. The benefit in this long-term benefit program is also not long-term. It has a lifetime maximum cap payout of $36,500. It gets you about 3 months of nursing home care. So it's not long-term care. It's a bad program. We can go into for hours why it's bad, but people sense it's bad and they want an option to get out of it. This initiative gives them the option to get out of it. Some of the defenders of the bad program will say, well, the opt-out effectively overturns the program. That's not entirely true. It could overturn the program. It could end the program. It also could force the program to restructure itself so that it's worth more and people might want to keep it. So I believe it will be a force for good in either improving the long-term care benefit program, or if it can't be improved, overturning it and start over and let's try something different. So those are the 6 initiatives. When we filed them last year and we're starting to collect the signatures to qualify them, to make them go forward, basically the left wing in the state was laughing. They said there's no way they're going to collect signatures to qualify them. These are reactionary, right-wing, extreme policy points. Well, the truth is they weren't. We had no trouble getting the signatures. In order to qualify an initiative in this state to proceed either to the legislature, in the case of an initiative to the legislature, or to the ballot, you need to collect about 340,000 signatures of registered Washington voters. We collected almost 500,000 signatures for all 6 of these. And it was easy to do. People were eager to sign them, especially restoring police pursuits, the family parental notification, Parents' Bill of Rights, and the repeal of the cap and trade. Those people loved those 3. And they loved all of them. So when they qualified in December of last year, we delivered the qualifying signatures to the Secretary of State, and again the left wing in Olympia laughed and they said, well, that's funny. The signatures may all be fake. We don't believe it. These things aren't going to go anywhere. They're not going to get a hearing in the legislature. They're not going to do anything. They were initiatives. I drafted them as initiatives to the legislature, specifically to shine a light on my colleagues in Olympia for having passed the bad bills that they were fixing, and not giving them any quarter to hide. Now, some smart people, even some smart Republicans, said, well, you've overestimated it, Jim. They're not going to give them hearings. Even if what you say is true, that you're trying to put pressure on them to highlight their bad votes previous, that's exactly why they're not going to even pretend they exist. They're going to ignore them completely, which the legislature is allowed to do with an initiative of the legislature. But if the legislature ignores an initiative of the legislature completely, the initiative goes to the next general election ballot for the people to vote on. That was the real hook. That was the lever that I wanted to use in the next legislative session, which is the one that started January this year. These 6 initiatives all polled at almost unbelievable levels of popular support. The weakest of them polls at about 70% support in Washington. The strongest, which was the police pursuit restoration, it scored like 90% support. Numbers so high in polling, you even doubt them because they're too high. And the support crosses all demographic lines. Republican and Democrat. Democrats support the initiatives. Gender, all 56 genders, all support these initiatives. All racial, ethnic breakdowns across all the demographic lines. Support for these initiatives is well over 60%, and even higher in many cases. And while the Speaker of the House in Olympia, now this is not DC, a woman by the name of Lori Jenkins, who's out of Tacoma, initially took a very hard and sarcastic line about how these initiatives were dead on arrival, wouldn't be heard in the legislature. Well, then they started seeing the polling numbers. And they realized, oh, well, if we ignore these initiatives in the legislature, they're all going to be on the ballot in November of 2024, and they're polling at 80 or 90% support. So people are going to turn up and vote for these initiatives, and then they're going to vote for conservatives all the way down the ballot. We don't want these things on the November ballot, so maybe we will give them hearings, and maybe we will vote them into law as the legislature so that they're not on the ballot in November of 2024. And it was very edifying for me to watch the little wheels turn and for them to figure out it was worse for these to be on the ballot in November than to pass them into law, even though they hated them. They had to pass at least some of them into law. And so they came up with this strategy. Basically, they split the baby. They decided 3 they would give hearings to and votes, and 3 they would ignore and let go to the ballot this November. If you've read the Bible, you know the split the baby thing is a losing strategy. Nevertheless, that's what they did. So they gave the hearings and eventually votes in the legislature to the Restoring Police Pursuits, the Parents' Bill of Rights, and the prospective no state income tax. Those 3 got hearings and votes. The other 3, repealing the cap and trade, repealing capital gains, and the opt-out on the long-term care benefit, those they ignored. And notice that the ones they ignored were the most specific tax-related initiatives. So that shows you what they really care about is money, not pure policy. The other ones were more pure policy. So that was interesting. It was also edifying to see in the hearings about the 3 that were given hearings and eventual votes, it was like a revival meeting. They came to political Jesus. After years of saying that all cops are bastards and the justice system is inherently racist and all this rhetoric about how bad law enforcement is, suddenly the speaker and others were saying, no, we love cops. We support the police. We want police to pursue criminal suspects. Well, it was because they had to, because they knew they had to vote yes on this reform to make sure it didn't end up on the ballot this November. Same with the Parents' Bill of Rights. It was the same story. Years of rhetoric about how parents are inherently bigoted and abusive and neglectful, and neglect is abuse, and all this rhetoric they talked about in Olympia. All of a sudden, well, we've always been for parental rights. We're for parental notification. And so it was wonderful to see the turnabout of my colleagues on the left wing to a more moderate perspective. It becomes law without the governor's signature and not subject to a governor's veto. So the governor has no role in this process. And frankly, I did it for that reason more than any other, because it was incredibly joyous to watch our outgoing governor, shake his little fist and talk about how horrible all of this is, and he couldn't do anything. And so those 3 passed. They got their hearings, they passed into law. They passed into law with fairly bipartisan votes because Democrats like to be reelected to their positions come election time. And the legislators from this area, while left-leaning on most cases, sucked it up and voted for the initiatives. There were a few no votes, but only from the really radical left members. And they passed, a couple passed out of the state Senate unanimously, and the ones that passed out of the House passed with like 70 or 80 votes out of 98. So they passed with very broad bipartisan support, which was wonderful because they're good ideas. They deserved bipartisan support, but it was also good to see the other guys on the defense. They're not used to it. They don't know what to do when they aren't in control of the debate and the narrative, and they basically folded faster than they had to. So the 3 passed into law. The 3 others, the repeal of the cap and trade, repeal of capital gains, and opt-out of long-term care, they will be on the November general election ballot. And when you hear people say to you, if you talk politics with friends or neighbors, and they don't like Trump, they'll say, well, Trump's going to be on the top of the ballot. He's going to make it hard for everybody. Trump is not going to be on the top of the ballot. By law and tradition in our state, initiatives are the top of the ballot. So the top of the ballot in November is going to be these 3 tax reform initiatives. And look at our state's history, even though our state is progressive politically on many issues, it's not on taxes. Our state is very conservative on taxes. Initiatives that reform or reduce or repeal taxes in this state almost always pass with a 60% or better margin. It is very likely that those three initiatives will pass this November. Now, there's going to be a massive advertising media campaign against them. There will also be an advertising and media campaign for them, but you're going to hear a lot about these three initiatives. And we can talk about that more later. But I am confident they're going to pass. And they will set the tone, I believe, for how people look at that general election ballot in November. And they are not a national issue. These initiatives are inherently focused on Washington. They're Washington tax policy that will be at the top of the ballot. And I think that will have a good effect on how voters look at all the rest of the ballot this November too. Well, while this was going on in the legislative session, there were other things going on as well. The Speaker and the other big shot Democrats in Olympia were trying to figure out their split the baby strategy. They were really sort of obsessed with the initiatives, which was a good thing, because they were not paying attention to their regular slate of bad proposals that were working their way through the legislature. And we, working out of a rather deep minority, were able to kill most of their bad proposals this past session. As one of my colleagues said when she was asked about what did you think about this legislative session that just ended, she said, well, it didn't suck. That's not how I would have said it, but I think the spirit of what she said was pretty true. It was one of the better, it was the best session I've ever been in, and I've been there 8 years, because we had them on the defense, they didn't keep their eye on the ball, and we were able to kill a bunch of bad proposals they made. They had a proposal to increase your property taxes more aggressively than they've been, we killed that. They had a proposal to do rent control, we killed that. They had this weird proposal to essentially push rural hospitals and small doctors' practices out of business. We killed that. And we were able to, thank you, it's good. We were able to be more effective than we've been at knocking down bad proposals by the majority party. The other thing that they did, they said loosely, a couple of real far-left people in this state, in the Seattle Times I called them angry weirdos, and then the paper didn't like that. But it was true, they were angry weirdos. They tried to do one of these lawsuits against Donald Trump to get him taken off the presidential primary ballot under the theory that he had fomented insurrection. They've done this in a number of states around the country, tried it. It's really harebrained. I mean, it's a stupid theory. But the theory is that the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution, which describes some stuff that happened after the Civil War, applies to fomenting insurrection. Well, it's just dumb, because implicit in the language in the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution is you were convicted of the crime of fomenting insurrection. Well, Donald Trump was never convicted. He was never charged with doing it. It was a left-wing fever dream that he was guilty of this. No court had adjudicated any part of it. And then they sloppily try to say, well, he's got these money problems in New York with how much his real estate's on. Well, that has nothing to do with the 14th Amendment. It was just dumb. And nevertheless, they filed this lawsuit trying to get Trump off the presidential primary ballot. And they did it in about 12 states. Colorado was prominent, and they tried it here in Washington too. In some states, the Republican Party was like, ooh, we don't want to touch this. We're not going to. I was like, no, we're going to defend this guy and keep him on the ballot, because this is not an attack on Donald Trump. This is an attack on Republicans and the primary process. So we're not just defending Trump, we're defending the process. And that's what the left always says. The Democrats always said, we defend the process against the Republicans. Well, this was one where they were literally attacking the primary process. So we have a couple of lawyers that are on retainer for the state party. We got one of them fired up, and we went, it was in Thurston County, it was in Olympia, the loss of the trial, and sure enough, we drew a woman, a judge who was an Inslee appointee judge, very left-wing, but, you know, in today's world, not the leftist left-wing, she was sort of a moderate left-wing. So, okay, we're pretty happy with the judge we got. We get in there, and just true as blazes, we make this completely coherent, well-defended argument, citing the 14th Amendment, repeating what it actually says, talking about the history of that part of the law, and saying how this argument is worthless. You can't take him off the ballot for the mere hint of wrongdoing. And then the angry weirdos made a completely incoherent argument, pointing their fingers at the judge, not a great play in the courtroom, and just none. They were like foaming at the mouth. They were making no sense. And the one judge says, okay, well, I'm going to go review all your filings, and I'll be back in an hour and a half with a decision. And she came back and she said, the lawsuit is dismissed, Trump stays on the ballot. This argument, this is a liberal judge, this argument about the 14th Amendment, it's poorly drawn, it doesn't make sense. You know, the defendant wins, the man stays on the ballot. So we were happy that day. Trump stayed on the presidential primary ballot. And then the U.S. Supreme Court, you may remember, about a month after this, they took the case out of Colorado and made a decision for the whole country on the matter. And their logic followed the woman judge in Thurston County in Washington. So I think our lawsuit actually had a good influence on the later lawsuit from the U.S. Supreme Court, which reached the same conclusion. So we're building the momentum. We're building the ground game of winning. And you're going to see more as we move into this election cycle now. You're going to see more than you've seen. You're going to hear more. The progressive left is very much scared. Now, they won't admit it anywhere. If you talk to your left-wing kid at Western Washington or someone you know in the Democrat Party, they're never going to admit this. But the big shots there are scared. More scared than they were in 2022 or 2020. Their presidential candidate, likely presidential candidate, there's no way to say this without sounding harsh, he's not in his right mind. And they have these initiatives here locally in Washington that they know they're on the losing side of. They've tried to do damage control on them, and they're going to run a bunch of TV and radio ads talking about how horrible the 3 remaining ones are, but they know they're popular. They know they're on the losing end of those. In the presidential primary, for which Donald Trump was on the ballot, the numbers in that primary, it was very interesting. Now you have to take all with a grain of salt. The overall participation was low. And I think that had to do with the fact we've got this thing where you have to check the box saying what party you're a member of. And the Republicans have opposed that policy. This was an update to that law that was made first in 2019. So this is actually the second 4-year cycle where this has been in place. We opposed it in 2019. We proposed getting rid of it in 2022. The Democrats like it. They've defended the check the box thing on the presidential primary. Now remember, it's for the presidential primary only. It doesn't apply to any other election. In our state law, on election law, the presidential primary has its own little section, and everything else is in the other section. So the law about the presidential primary is completely separate of all other law about elections. And the other thing I got questions about during the presidential primary was, well, why did the box have to be on the outside of the envelope? Couldn't it be on the inside or under a flap or something? That's not in the law. The law requires the checkbox. It was a bureaucratic choice to put it on the outside of the envelope. So that is with the fault of the Secretary of State, the bureaucracy, the state Secretary of State. They chose to put the boxes on the outside of the envelope. And their excuse when I pressed them for why don't you put like a flap over it or something so people can't see it? Well, it's easier for us to process if it's just on the outside. Well, last time I checked, you are supposed to serve the people, not do what's easy for you. But anyway, so the overall participation in that primary was low. I think mostly because of the box thing. But if you take that numbers that did turn out, the overall absolute number of voters for total in that presidential primary, the split between Republican and Democrat was closer than it's been in 30 years. It was about a 5% difference. Now the Democrats still had more votes in the presidential primary, but it was 900,000 to about 700,000, and actually a little better than 700,000. So the spread was about 5, maybe 6 points. And that's as close as it's been in, like I say, in like at least 20 years and probably like 25 years. That was a promising sign for Republicans. The other promising sign in the presidential election, primary election, which has the Democrats absolutely going bonkers right now, is the Secretary of State tracked responses by age cohort. And young voters under 25, checked the Republican box almost equal to the number who checked the Democrat box. Now, this is not an official statistic. You can't take it all the way to the bank, but it is very encouraging. It makes us a little encouraged. It makes the other guys absolutely nuts because they have counted on like a 30-point majority among young voters to squeak out their thinner overall majorities in recent elections. If young voters break evenly in 2024, the other guys know they're in the deep soup. So all of these things encourage me a lot, and there's a last thing that encourages me, and then we'll mix it up a little bit here. Right toward the end of the legislative session in Olympia that just ended, there was one bill, a bad bill, that we were not able to kill. That was House Bill 1589. What this bill does is it begins the process of banning natural gas as an energy source in this state. It is not an outright ban. There's some misinformation, misreporting about it that says it's a ban on natural gas. It's not quite. But it does begin the process of banning natural gas. There's no rational reason to do that. Natural gas is relatively clean. It's relatively energy efficient form of energy. People like it. They especially like to cook with it as opposed to cooking with electric heat. So it's popular, it's clean, it's relatively cheap as a source of energy. It is completely an ideological, environmental, radical notion that we need to get rid of natural gas in the state. Nevertheless, the current governor, who's shaking his little fist about the initiatives, he's banked his whole reputation on being a climate guru or whatever, very radical environmental agenda. And he's fighting for this hard. When it came to the floor of the House for a vote, it's not a ban, but it's the build-up to a ban. I call it a sort of ban. There weren't enough votes to get it off the floor. Even the Democrats didn't have enough votes. They had too many people who didn't like it. Part of the bill is designed to explicitly raise utility rates. They use a little budget accounting gimmick. They accelerate, by law, they accelerate how quickly utilities have to depreciate their natural gas hardware. So their pipe system, the trucks, all the capital assets of their business that are related to natural gas, the law requires them to write that down in 3 years as opposed to a longer write-down process that a business usually uses to write down capital assets. That creates on their books a paper loss, an accounting loss for the initiative, or for the utility rather, because they're writing off these assets more quickly. They then use that paper loss as the reason to increase their utility rates that ratepayers pay, not just for natural gas, but for electricity or natural gas, to compensate the utility for this paper loss that isn't a real loss, but is an accounting contrivance. So the reason the Democrat legislators didn't want to vote for this is is they knew it was going to raise utility rates, and they were going to be on the hook to angry constituents who are seeing their utility rates go up. So the Speaker called the vote. She called the bill to the floor for a vote, then held it open. We didn't actually vote yet, which is a little unusual. What she was doing was she was giving herself and the current governor, who was standing in the wings of the House, time to browbeat Democrat legislators who were going to vote no into voting yes for this stupid bill. And what the governor said to his own supporters in the state house was, if you don't vote yes on this bill, I'm going to veto any bill with your name on it. And it's like the strongest thing that this guy has ever done, right? He's basically a bumbling moron. I've never known him to be that ruthless in any political environment. I'm not sure it was actually him. He was the one doing it. I think he's got this personal attorney, a woman called Catherine Leathers. I think she was doing some of the threatening. But whatever. I'm not invited to those conversations, so I don't know exactly how it played out. But they kept the vote open. The governor twisted arms, and they ended up squeaking the thing through on the narrowest possible margin. But I look at it as a gift, because it is going to make customers of these utilities nuts. They're going to be apoplectic. They're going to be angry. Their bills are already rising for other reasons, the Climate Commitment Act. Now they're going to rise even faster, and you're going to see people whose electricity bills now are maybe $80 a month, maybe $100 a month. Their bills are going to be like $150 a month. And we are going to tie that directly to House Bill 1859. And so even when we lose one this year, we win something, and that we won some political advantage on the energy front. So that's the state of play right now. I'm going to open the rest of, before I open the rest of it up to questions, and I did see your hand there a minute ago talking about WASDA. I did want to, at least Simon Sefzik is here. Simon, you want to come up, and you recently a member of the legislature, and tell me what you see, and tell everybody what you see happening in Olympia, and if anything I said is right.
I was going to say is, have you been to any of these that's in a museum, Jim? This is I feel like we have the coolest place for you to present.
I feel like I want to get into a gunfight with you. Right, that's right.
Well, I think we should give a big round of applause to Jim Walsh here. And I mean, one of the reasons, Jim, you were saying you were in Battleground yesterday. You've been doing a series of these. You also drive into the office in Bellevue, where the GOP is headquartered, but you live down in the 19th district, where you're also tending to the needs of constituents and hosting town halls on local issues, and you made it all the way up here, and you're traveling all over the state. I mean, that is something that is extremely, I can promise you that Shasti, the head of the Democrat Party, is not doing that. But I mean, it's just very uncommon for any state party chair to come and connect with us sort of at the grassroots level, as opposed to just staying in an office in Bellevue all day. So, I mean, this means a lot that you're here.
We make fundraising phone calls from the truck just as well as well.
And, I mean, I think that just contributes to what I was going to say. Well, you know, today for many Christians is sort of, I mean, this week is the holiest week for many Christians. Today is called sort of Waiting Saturday, Silent Saturday, where we anticipate good news that's supposed to come tomorrow. Of course, tomorrow, some of you saw the White House just declared the Transgender Day of Visibility on Easter, the most holy of Christian holidays, sort of as a middle finger to many of us. But, you know, to me, it's a reminder of this season of this idea of anticipation, of hoping for something better. And, you know, there's one woman I thought of when Jim was mentioning some of these initiatives, a woman named Amber Goldade, who is a mother down in Puyallup, who in early of 2022, her 12-year-old daughter was walking home from a sleepover with her best friend when a driver that was high on drugs drives by, hits, and instantly kills a 12-year-old Immaculate. This is an individual that the police only a week before saw commit a crime, robbed a local store, but were not allowed to pursue due to the no pursuit law. She died within visibility of the front porch of where Amber and her husband live. And I've had the opportunity, Jim's had the opportunity to meet and to talk with Amber, who, after all this happened, said that she was willing to do anything, come to any meeting, go down to Olympia to testify about this pursuit law change. She tried it in 2023 as well. She tried it in last year's legislative session to go before the legislature, and the majority party didn't give really the bill the time of day. They disregarded her concerns. Amber didn't give up hope. Amber kept fighting. Amber worked with Jim. Amber worked with Brian Haywood, the fine folks at Let's Go Washington, on this initiative to come forward in memory, really, of Immaculate and everything that Immaculate went through. And now, because of you, really, because of you that spent time late at night signing initiatives, calling your friends, reminding them to, of course, there's nothing that can bring back the life of Immaculate Goldade, but the tears running down Amber's face when that initiative passed, when she saw that another family doesn't have to go through what she experienced, meant the world alone. And so that to me is a reminder that even as we wait today for tomorrow, as we wait in anticipation for bigger, better, and brighter things, I think that what we've seen in the state this year through these initiatives, what's happening locally, and some of these factors that Jim mentioned, I believe give us many, many reasons for hope, really for a better future, not just for Amber, but for everybody up here in Whatcom County. So Jim, thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thanks, Probably it was just an excuse for me to get a quick drink of water before we go on to the question part. This is the part where most of these town halls have become the most lively. So, questions? Let's start with the hand in the back that I saw earlier.
I didn't have a question so much as a comment.
Go ahead.
When you talk about a small victory, it was actually, I think, basically, when you talk about a small victory, it was I think actually it was a bigger victory than that, because most districts in Washington State are small districts, and many of them have not participated in WASDA activities because they felt there wasn't any reason to. So as a result of this victory, more of them are coming back to the table and getting involved. And so I think that's the bigger.
Sure, that's a good point. And thank you, that's right. And when I said small victory, I just meant there was more to come. I mean, not just on more activization, more people getting involved, but I think there's going to be better policy out of WASDA now, too.
I have a microphone for you, too.
Oh,
I can
great.
walk around for you.
Good, thanks.
Real quick, if I can throw something out, we have Bill Bruck with the Skagit County Republican Party is up here with us today. Thanks for making the journey up, Bill.
As Bill is in charge of election integrity, we have a committee in the state party that focuses on election integrity issues. Obviously a hot button committee dealing with a lot of controversial stuff, but Bill is the chair of that committee and handles our work in trying to improve election integrity in the state. We can talk for an hour about that, Bill, I know. But our focus at the state party, and this is what Bill is working on for the state party, is trying to clean up voter databases, voter rolls in the counties. There's a lot, like with the police reform, there's a lot we can do about election integrity. But the single biggest piece is that there are too many people on the voter rolls who are either dead or moved away or whatever, aren't here. And remember, in an all mail-in ballot state, we mail ballots to all those people on the database. So we got all these ballots floating around out there that are being sent to people who aren't there anymore or were never there or whatever. That's where there's an opportunity for trouble to happen with all those extra ballots floating around. We believe the most important thing we can do is identify those databases and clean them up. The law already requires the county auditors and election officials to do that. They're just not doing it, in our opinion, as effectively as they should be. So a lot of the work we're doing on election integrity is cleaning up the voter rolls.
Do we have a good candidate for Secretary of State yet?
We do. In fact, there are probably going to be more than one that file. Right now, one has filed, a fellow by the name of Haglin out of Snohomish County, Bob Haglin. It is also rumored that I don't know if I want to say his name, but a current state senator is also going to file to run for Secretary of State. And lastly, there's a mayor of a mid-sized town who has a background in kind of government systems and some election work is also considering filing. So neither the senator nor the mayor have filed yet. I don't want to say their names until they do, because they might not. But we will have at least, I predict, 2 and possibly 3 candidates running in the race.
We better be careful because Kim Wyman went and worked with George Soros.
Yeah. And there's some misconception, well, you mentioned Kim Wyman. There's some misconception, people believe that she's running again. That is not true. What happened was, before she resigned to take the job back east, she had filed her PDC, Public Disclosure Commission, information as if she were going to run again this year. So she shows up, if you search Secretary of State, Kim Wyman has a filing as if she's running in 2024, but she's not. That's a leftover from the last, from 2021.
Just a couple things. On 1589, and I don't know if this was corrected, was there something in there that says that, like, we could do an initiative to get rid of that?
Yeah, good question, Tasha. They put what's called an emergency clause on the bill, which means normally in Olympia, anytime a bill becomes law, it takes effect 90 days after either the end of the session when it was passed or when the governor signed it. Those dates are a little different because the governor has some extra time after a session to sign bills. So they take effect 90 days after that. You can put another active date on any bill. You can state a specific date, certain that it takes effect. Sometimes you'll see that where a bill will say this takes effect January 1, 2026. You can do that. That's legal to do. You can also put an emergency clause in the bill which says this takes effect immediately upon the end of the session or the governor's signature. That's what they did with this natural gas semi-ban thing. They put an emergency clause on it so that it's effective the minute the governor signs it. That makes a referendum impossible. In our state, remember, we have initiatives and we have referenda. Referenda are like initiatives, but a little different. They specifically repeal, they can only do one thing, and that is specifically repeal a recently passed bill. Referenda are also different than initiatives in that they're easier to qualify. You need to get fewer signatures to qualify a referendum, and the timeline is also tighter. Part of the reason for the 90-day default time for a bill to take effect as law is you have to collect the signatures for a referendum in 90 days. So if you put an emergency clause on a bill, it makes the referendum impossible because you don't have 90 days to collect the signatures. An initiative can do lots of things. An initiative can repeal a bill or a law, and it doesn't have to be recently passed. It can be passed 10 years ago. An initiative can repeal a law, an initiative can make a new law. Initiatives can do all kinds of things. Initiatives are more difficult, it takes longer generally to get them qualified. You also need more signatures. And there are other things that make it more difficult and time-consuming too. So the natural gas semi-ban has an emergency clause, can't get rid of it with an initiative. We can get rid of it with can't get rid of it with a referendum. We can get rid of it with an initiative. And so, I think it's news now, it's a public document. I filed an initiative to repeal 1589 Thursday. So, it'll take a little longer, but if we can collect 340,000 signatures by July 5th, that would be on the ballot this November. That's not an initiative of the legislature, that's an initiative of the people. It goes straight to the people. So it's going to be difficult. I'm not sure we can get the signatures collected in that time frame. We're sort of gathering the houses again, all the groups, let's go Washington, restore Washington. Nobody's completely committed to the project yet, but we're trying to get people committed to the project. So if we don't get it this year, we'll file it again next year.
And then a follow-up on, just one more thing, on you were talking about school boards. Wasn't there a bill, and I can't recall if it got passed, if the school boards don't support the state rules of education, then they can reduce their funding?
It's bad. It's not as bad as it sounds, but it's bad. Basically what they're doing is they're giving cover to something that the superintendent of schools tried to do a couple years ago by edict and was roundly ridiculed by me and other people for trying that. So this is giving him some cover. The state law currently does not give the superintendent of schools, the state superintendent, discretionary power to withhold funds from schools because of policy disagreements. There's a very narrow section of the law that allows the state superintendent to withhold funds from a school district in cases of allegations of like embezzlement and malfeasance at the school district. It's very narrow. That's the only time he can withhold money. And even then, he can only do it while the charges are being investigated. It's very narrow. This bozo, who's the current state superintendent, took that section of the law and then took a different section of the law which describes the governor's emergency powers, which are much broader, and he conflated them. He put them side by side in a memorandum he sent to schools to create the artificial, the false impression that his ability to withhold funds, which was narrowly restricted to situations of alleged embezzlement, was as broad as the governor's fairly broad emergency powers. It was completely sleazy. This guy Reichel, the current superintendent of schools, he's done this multiple times on multiple subjects. Again, he's like Inslee. He's not that bright. I don't think he did it, but somebody on his staff did it. They've done it several times where they send these memos out that go to school directors and school superintendents, and he does this bait and switch type trick where he will compare as if they are connected, unconnected sections of the RCW, state law, to create an impression he has power he doesn't have. What this bill did was actually give him more discretionary power to withhold funds. Now, there are other parts of the RCW, the Washington Code, the Revised Code of Washington, and of the state constitution that negate what this bill says. So I suspect if someone takes it to court, if he ever withholds money, citing this bill, this thing that's going to be a law, and someone sued him, a school district sued him over it, I predict he would lose. Because remember, the Constitution trumps statutory law, and the Constitution limits his ability to do that.
Jim.
Well, let's go in order, we'll get back to you.
Yeah, Jim, what was that law the number that you were just mentioning?
Giving the power to the superintendent is 5421, I forget the number.
2331.
5331.
2331.
2331.
2331. Sorry, so it wasn't a Senate, it was a House bill. No. 2331 is the book banning bill. Yeah, 2331 is the book banning. It was a Senate bill. It was like, I think that's what it is. Maybe that's it.
No, that's the curriculum one.
It's a Senate bill. It's 5 something. Now my mind is all super. I'll pull the right Senate bill and I'll post it on my website.
Okay, and the other question I had is on your previous points there. The 5th of July, is that something that's statutory law, or is that just the timeline? What is the clarification?
That is, it's not statutory law, but it is administrative code based on statutory law. But every year there are dates set based on a schedule required by statutory law, but it's at the discretion of the Secretary of State to determine the specific dates. But they're set up as days from other dates. So it's 90 days from this or 120 days from that. So it is, the law, statutory law doesn't refer to that date, but it gives the timelines by which different stages of an initiative process have to be completed. It happens this year, the date's July 5th. Well,
The governor signed into law that the state can take your child, 13 and 17, away from the parents, and then legally have control of his environment and his, quote, as they call it, medications, which could lead to mutilating the child's ability to be a mother or a father. And the doctor gets paid to do it. Why did that happen in the Washington State legislature and the idiot governor signed it into law?
that was not this session, that was last session. That was the
Right.
super controversial Senate Bill 5599. This gets to the point I was making on the Parents' Bill of Rights. The underlying presumption in that piece of law, that policy, 5599, is that's literally where they use the rhetoric that neglect is abuse. The driving force behind that bill, now law, is a group of activists who believe in transgenderism. They believe that people can change their gender identity. And they have as like an article of faith in their ideology that parents reject children who are gender dysphoric. I know parents who have kids who are gender confused. They don't reject or abuse their children. They try to help their kid work through the issue. But it is an article of faith to these people that parents are hateful toward their own children. And they believe, and I think they, in their hearts they believe this, that that law protects children from hateful and abusive parents. Now, that belief is wrong, in my opinion, but that drives them. That's the motive behind that policy. We debated that bill as hard as we could on the floor of the legislature, and we were strong and unified in opposition to it, but we don't have enough votes to stop it. I mean, we need more conservatives in the legislature, and we can overturn 5599 in a minute. There's a lot of questions too. Does the Parents' Bill of Rights, which is taking law now, does that undo 5599? Not entirely, but it does undo parts of 5599. The most troubling part of that bill was the part, and you mentioned, where laws who know that the child is in a shelter or is in what that law calls a host home can withhold that information that they know from the custodial parent who says, where the heck is my kid? 2081, the Parents' Bill of Rights says they can't do that anymore. If the parent says, where the heck is my kid, and the school administrator knows where the kid is, the school administrator has to tell the parent where the kid is. Now, that doesn't fix all of the bill that has you upset, but I think it fixes a critical part of it, and that the child can't be hidden from the custodial parent guardian. So it's a step. To go the rest of the way, I need more allies in the room.
Switching the subject a little bit, please. You mentioned quite a few tax issues. The one you haven't touched on is death tax. Now, many states follows the death tax same as the federals. Washington is one of those states that does not follow the federal law. Consequently, the exemption in Washington state is significantly lower than the exemption in federal. I wondered if there is any thoughts in the state legislature given to updating the Washington state law to follow the federal.
Sure, I mean, we've run that bill. We've filed that bill multiple years running, and we can't get a hearing for it. So again, we know the policy fix. The policy is easy. The fix is easy to make the state system of death tax comply with federal. It's just with the current governor and the current Speaker of the House in Olympia, they won't give that bill a hearing. It can't get a vote. So the solution is easy to draft, to write. It's not easy to get it passed. The progressive majority wants more money, and they will not give up money. As I said earlier, it was easy to see how they decided which initiatives to swallow hard and pass into law, and which they didn't want to, they couldn't even vote on, and they're sending the people. It had to do with the most direct tax policy changes. You'll get sick of me hearing me say this, but I need more allies in Olympia, and we could pass this. We could also do it as an initiative, but if we're going to run another tax reform initiative, I would rather focus on property tax reform than the death tax. So part of the challenge is we have other bigger issues we want to fix in tax policy first, but you're right. Your question is right, it's well informed, and we need to do that at some point. I just can't promise you when, because I don't have enough votes, friendly votes, in the legislature.
Hi. Yes, I wanted to try to say a broad comment and question. I'm very concerned about how the people who are in government, whether it's state or federal, they benefit financially, and they love the system that allows them to continue to benefit, so the system will remain in place overall. And I don't know how many people I represent, but I know I represent myself, that it makes me sick that it's this way. And does our Constitution give the people, it is to be by consent of the governed that they rule, and they're to be our protectors and defenders, not our masters. So I'm just wondering, with the election system not functioning in a way that we can make sure that it is working right, feels like we're just sinking. And how do we as people get a change, get a real change, not little ones like laws and details on wordings and things like that? How can we get a change? We need it. And I guess I just go to the people and say, you know, we need to talk, we need to think philosophically, and we need to think, how are we going to change? How are we going to change, and how are the persons who occupy these positions going to change as people who love what's true and right and good, instead of the pocketbook, which is a temporary benefit, and there is eternity to face.
Well, that's a proposition we need to give everybody, not just elected officials. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in what you said. I believe we can make real change, both in Olympia and DC. The district that I represent in Olympia, before I represented it, was considered deep blue, and a Republican couldn't get elected. And I just decided to start telling the truth about what was happening in Olympia, and people responded well to that. And I did, you know, at first I was the only Republican from that area, but now, in the couple of elections that have happened since then, everyone's a Republican. All the legislators are Republican. All the county commissioners except one are Republican. I mean, the whole area has turned. And it turned because we started telling the truth about tax policy, about K-12 school management, about crime and police and law enforcement, and about timberland policy. My district has a lot of public timberland, and that whole thing has just been disastrously mismanaged. So we started telling the truth, and it stuck. And I mean, the happiest time I am when I do these kinds of events in the district I represent, and even now in other districts, the best thing I have is people come to me afterward and says, look, I hate Trump, I hate Republicans, but I believe you're telling me the truth about what's happening, so I'll support you. And that's what it takes to overcome the resistance people have to voting for the truth. is you have to, it's like a self-fulfilling thing. You have to start with telling the truth. And I mean, I get called all kinds of names, racist, anti-Semite, bigot. They call all the names, they call them out. But I'm not any of those things. What I do is I tell difficult truths about what's going on. And you have to have a thick skin. And a lot of people in elected office don't have thick skins. They take the insults very personally. And more importantly, they get scared of the insults. So they won't say the truth. It's not because they want to get rich. It's because they don't want someone to call them a bad name. And you can do politics one of two ways. You can try to triangulate and figure out how not to offend anybody, not to shake, make any waves, and get to 51% in all of your elections. And you'll get elected, and you'll stay elected. Or you can be bold, you can tell the truth, you can fight hard, and you can bring votes to you. In my first election, I was elected with 50, it wasn't even 51%, it was 50.5%. In the last election, I was elected with 64%. So, yeah, they call me bad names, and they send out postcards with ugly pictures of me, oh, he's a bad guy. But people want to hear the truth, so tell the truth is the answer. Now, to the money question, in state politics, it's really hard to line your pockets. And this is true even of my progressive colleagues. They're not getting rich what they're doing. What they often will do is they'll set themselves up to take a job after they're in the legislature with like a big budgeted nonprofit. In the homeless housing space, there's a lot of that goes on. You'll see people who are in the legislature for 4 years or 8 years or something. They'll go out, they'll stop, they'll retire from the legislature, and then they'll go get a job with one of these housing nonprofits where they make $250,000 a year or something. That happens. That happens right now in Olympia. I think most of the problem you're despairing about, though, is out of DC, where the rules on like how you invest money in things are very dodgy, and federal Congress members are able to do things that regular people can't do. And they've tried to fix that. They've tried to fix that with law, and somehow those law efforts always get watered down and they don't take effect. So I did this woman here, I think what next, you had a question earlier?
Yes, on 5427, do you have any comment about this hotline to
the snitch line.
Attorney General? It doesn't sound like what the United States of America needs.
Okay. I did, John Curley, the talk radio guy, I did a segment with Curley about this bill. So I posted it on social media, I'll do it again so people can see it. This is the snitch line. So what it is it's a hate crime reporting line, phone line. And people keep asking, what's the number? I'm going to call it right now. They don't have the number set up yet. But it puts in place this program where there will be some kind of 800 number. And people can call the 800 number and complain about a hate crime incident or a hate speech incident, even if it's not a crime. Okay, this sounds a little like the East German Stasi from the Cold War for me. But anyway, our argument against it on the floor of the legislature was, look, if someone's committed a crime, call 911, call the cops. If somebody paints a swastika on your car, call the police and get the police to come. Depending on the situation, that is probably a crime, and the cops will investigate it and find out who did it. This call an 800 number that isn't the police, but goes to the state attorney general's office, where they will compile a database, and they may send it to the local police or they may not. This is no good. It doesn't help fight crime. It doesn't help fight hate speech. And then and I'm not even sure hate speech is really something we need to fight, because I think there are First Amendment issues with these attempts. You can say whatever hate you want. It's if you hit somebody or you mess up their property that you've committed a crime. If somebody wants to scream a bunch of hatred stuff, I mean, I get it all the time. that's protected, unfortunately, by the First Amendment in those cases. Now, you can't threaten to, like, kill somebody. That you can't do that. But you can say hateful stuff, and it's ugly and it's not good. But I don't know that that should be criminalized. And the bill is even worse. You can call the snitch line number even if you were not a party to the hate speech. So you weren't the one saying it or the one that it was said to. You merely overheard it. You can call this number and the Attorney General will put something into a database. Well, that's set up for all kinds of problems. I mean, maybe you misunderstood. You know, maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was them giving an example of what hate speech is. I mean, who knows what it is? It's very squishy, the terms of this thing. The Attorney General is backpedaling a little bit in some of his comments about this. Now, the bill did pass, and the Attorney General is now saying, well, you know, we're just trying to discourage bad behavior. We're not going to use a database of what people are saying. But frankly, I don't trust any of that. And I don't like, you know, we talked about the voter databases and needing to clean them up. The government's not good at managing databases. And I'm afraid if they're keeping a database of people who said bad things, it's going to be weaponized and used against, well, I'll give you another example. It's not the state, that law has to do with the state attorney general. Separately, the state secretary of state, Steve Hobbs, has contracted with an English cyber sleuthing company called Logically AI to track people who are critical of the state secretary of state online. Well, you know, guess who literally public enemy number one of that was? I was literally the first person Logically AI tracked. And because I've been highly critical of the state secretary of state and his handling of elections in the state. And that is, and we tried to do an ethics complaint against him because of that, and the ethics board said we don't have jurisdiction over this contract. It was bureaucratic mumbo jumbo. But that kind of thing, where they're like snooping and making reports, and this company that he contracted with, they're not even an American company, they're a British company. So, you know, they don't know about the First Amendment, they're just doing what the contract says, which is snooping and listening to people. And I don't care, I mean, I'd gladly say everything I said about Steve Hobbs again, and I will. I mean, but the idea of, so that's two different state bureaucracies, the Attorney General's office and the State Secretary of State's office, that are both doing these things that kind of undermine your and my right to say the Secretary of State's a goofball and he screwed up election management. That's absolutely your right and mine to say. And, you know, is that hatred? No, it's not hatred. You know, can they say it's hate speech? Well, that's what they're already saying. You know, I'm against both. We will, the hopeful thing is the Attorney General's already backpedaling from the points we brought up about the snitch line. It's not enforced yet. They don't have the 800 number set up yet. We're going to get a new Attorney General because the current one's running for governor. We had the chance to put a guy called Pete Serrano in as Attorney General. He's not just a Republican, he is a Republican, but he's more than just a Republican. He's read the state constitution. He has an idea that it talks about, you know, freedom of speech and freedom of conscience. And I think he would probably disband that snitch line. So let's vote for Pete.
So this sounds very similar to the snitch line that was set up during COVID to rat out people.
It's structurally exactly the same.
Okay, how was that defeated? Because that didn't last very long.
Well, that one was never law.
Okay.
That was set up by an executive order, and we just started smashing it in the bully pulpit and talking about it a lot. And once that happened, it was set up through the State Department of Health. And once we started drawing attention to it, the State Department of Health got very nervous. And they effectively stopped using it immediately, but they didn't admit that. They said they were keeping it going even though they weren't. And then later they said, okay, we've got enough information, we're stopping now. So they did damage control on that one. But mechanically and structurally, this one is based exactly on that one. The method of each, the nuts and bolts of them are exactly the same.
Thank you. He gave me an okay.
Okay.
So I have to just say to you that I am so waiting to meet you. I'm really in Wilberforce, yes you are.
Thank you.
You have a motion of slave ships
That's
for
high
20
praise.
years, and you didn't get up. So every signature that I got, I was blessed to go to now here she left. Bring it over to Tasha. So I want to thank you for not giving up, because seriously, I mean, I can go to Idaho, which is to help the governor, and run on pro-life. You know what? And you know, you didn't give up. I go, there is a man who's not giving up. I want to know, do you think there's any hope? Because that's what you gave me, hope. As his wife said, if you have a bad taste in your mouth, like the soul said, you spit it out. But you gave me a reason to do something. So, is there any hope in thinking that with all this, I say it's indoctrination. With all the groups that come into your government school as a sector, unless you can change it down there, then Ethan, is there any hope of ever thinking we could get money for a charter school, vouchers, something like that? And do you think, because I'm working desperately with a particular group of Latinos within the Catholic Church, because morally they'll say this and then they go vote me. And so I'm trying to reason in love. But do you think there's any hope in that community and with vouchers for something to the government education?
Thank you.
Oh, my girl, yes.
So that was like 4 questions in one. Charter schools. Yes, there is a chance to improve, and really what it is restate or reinvigorate our state's law on charter schools. We allow charter schools in the state. We have allowed the bureaucrats to kind of peck away at the program for doing charter schools. They've used time, they've run the clock out on various applications for charter schools, but the law is still there. So the law probably needs some tweaking to invigorate it again, but the law is already there. Charter schools are an issue where we do get some bipartisan support. There are some brave Democrats who will support charter school, and that's how we got the law in place in the first place. So it is an issue where we can find some real bipartisan common ground. I'm optimistic about that. About something, we don't use the term voucher here in Washington for various technical reasons, but we do like scholarship programs that resemble vouchers in other states. I've run, Vicki Kraft, one of our colleagues, when Luann was in the legislature and I was there, and Vicki Kraft was a legislator out of Clark County in the Vancouver area. Every year, they were always ignored. Vicki is not in the legislature anymore, so I took over running what is essentially Vicki Kraft's school choice bill every year. We've gotten a hearing. I got one hearing on it about 3 years ago, no vote. And since then, the hearing went so well for school choice that the chair of the education committee said, I'm never going to give it a hearing again because the hearing was too positive and there were too many people supporting it, making really good arguments for supporting school choice. Look, it's happening anyway. And it's happening by parents and grandparents taking their kids out of public school. That is school choice. It's a hard version of it, but it is. You may have seen, it was just in the paper this week, the Yakima School District is letting go like 100 teachers because so many families have pulled their kids out that they call it, is it allocation payments? I'm screwing the word up. But their monthly payment based on enrollments have gone to allotment, thank you. Of course you would know that. The allotment payments have gone down so much in Yakima because so many families are pulling their kids out that the school district has got to lay off teachers. And you know that's the last thing they do because the unions are so powerful. They'll lay everybody else off first, and then, but if they've got to lay off teachers, you know they're really having trouble. And they are really having trouble because so many families are taking kids out. Yakima's got a lot of Hispanic and Latino families in it, and they're taking their kids out because they don't want their kids being indoctrinated, particularly on the sex identity stuff. So it's happening. Now, I don't know what can we give those families a break by giving them some reimbursement if they send their kids to a Catholic school or a Christian school? Yeah, we could. That's the nature of these scholarships. We call them vouchers. It's still a third rail issue in Olympia because, like I said, we got one hearing. It went really well, and the chair was so scared of it, she said no more hearings. It's another one like death tax. If I could get like 14 more conservatives in the legislature, we could have a majority and we could dictate these rules. One of the groups that was involved in the 6 initiatives, not the more well-known Let's Go Washington, but the other Restore Washington, has sort of taken school choice on as their signature issue. And remember, these groups that were involved in the initiatives, it's like a confederation, it's like a loose affiliation of organizations that cooperate with each other. So this one, Restore Washington, which is run by a guy, another former legislator, Kerry Condada out of like the Chelan area, and a guy called Mike McKee out of Grant County, Moses Lake area. Those 2 guys run that organization. They've taken school choice on as like their signature issue. And they're running initiatives to implement a school choice program in the state based on the Vicky Kraft, Jim Walsh bill that we've been trying to run in Olympia. So that's fine. They're trying to do it as an initiative. It was interesting to see that their initiative, once they filed it, got viciously attacked by the anti-school choice organizations, challenging its title and challenging all the mechanical elements of how that initiative was filed. So they were right on it and they were attacking it immediately. That tells you what a hot issue it is. Lastly, on the issue of energizing Catholics and particularly Latino Hispanics, Catholic members, well, I'm Catholic, but I'm a traditionalist Catholic. We're like an offshoot of the Catholic Church, and we don't, all right. We don't like Vatican II, and the most famous one is Mel Gibson. He's a traditionalist Catholic. But I've dealt with the Catholic Church. We dealt particularly with them on who talked about 5599. You did. When we tried to do the referendum to overturn Senate Bill 5599, the Catholic diocese in Western Washington completely screwed it up. Initially, they wouldn't let us collect signatures at Catholic churches for the referendum that would have overturned that. I specifically had a meeting with them where we talked about come to Jesus, talked about how big a mistake that was. They eventually reversed their position and did allow the signatures to be gathered at the churches, but it was kind of too late at that point, and we narrowly missed the signature requirement for that one. So the Catholic Church, they had new people. They got rid of the guy who made that decision, and they brought in a new secondary bishop into the Seattle Archdiocese who brings some ideological balance to the organization. So these are good steps. The last piece of your multi-part question I want to talk about is the question of bringing ethnic voters, specifically Latino and Hispanic voters, into the Republican Party. That is happening organically. They're coming over in droves. That's happening on the federal level. Hispanic voters in Texas and Florida and California are voting for Donald Trump in a way that is similar to what I said earlier about young voters here.
Awesome.
And there's a map a couple people did of the precincts in Texas all along the border, which are heavily Latino and Hispanic areas in the population. There was this expectation they were going to be very blue in this presidential primary in Texas that happened, completely dark red. They're voting Republican very strong. Because first-generation legal immigrants, they don't like illegal immigration any more than anybody else does. So that's been interesting to see. And lastly, we are dealing with an issue very urgently here that affects Yakima and other parts of the state. Redistricting. Every 10 years we redistrict our congressional districts and our legislative districts based on the census every 10 years. So every 10 years we do the census in the 0 year, 2010, 2020, 2030 on. The next year, in the year ending in 1, states around the country shift the shape of their districts for Congress or legislatures based on changes in the population in the previous census. We did this in 2021. In our state, we have an interesting setup. In many states, the legislature votes on redistricting like a bill. In our state, we have a bipartisan commission that's appointed that does the redistricting, shifts the lines of the districts based on the new population numbers. That happened in 2021. It was a little bit controversial. The commission missed its deadline, barely. But the state Supreme Court gave them extra time to finish the work, and they did their redistricting. Right after that happened in 2022, a group of left-wing activists in Seattle sued, claiming that the maps done at 2020 census were discriminating against Hispanic voters in Yakima County specifically. And they alleged that 2 of the legislative districts in Yakima County were designed to minimize the voting power of Hispanic voters in those districts. This case bounced around the federal courts for a little while. Just about a week ago, a federal judge, also in Seattle, issued a new redistricting map that overtakes the commission's work and changes not just those 2 Yakima districts, but 13 other legislative districts around the state in a way that favors Democrats and actually doesn't do anything for Latino voters. So we are in the midst of challenging that judge's ruling right now, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to get it tossed. But what this reflects is this political reality. The Democrat Party in this state assumes that Latino voters are Democrats. And the hard truth for them is it's like a 50-50 split among Latino voters, and it's getting better for Republicans. More Latino families are voting Republican. The Democrats are terrified by this, and they're trying to play basically gerrymandering games with the shape of legislative districts to try to insulate themselves from the shift that's happening in Latino voters to the Republican Party. The great irony in this judge's map that he put out is there is currently one woman Latino voter, legislator from that area. She's a state senator. Her name is Nikki Torres. She's a Republican. She's the only Latina legislator from that part of the state, and she's a Republican. And that drives the Democrats nuts because they have this narrative that all Latino voters are Democrats. She's redistricted out of her current district by the judge's map. So she's either going to have to move to stay in her new district, or she's going to have to run in a different district. It's complete political game playing by this judge in Seattle. The people who sued are in Seattle, and they're making a ruling about Yakima. It's completely politics. But what it can't deny, what is like a force of gravity or the tide, is Latino voters are moving. They're moving to the right. And the Democrats are just, they don't know what to do, so they're using the courts to try to mess with things. But even that's not going to work, because ultimately Latino voters are voting more conservative, and you can mess with the map all you want, that's not changing that reality. So, thank you, and be optimistic. The numbers are moving our direction. All right, we've got on.
We don't want to cut Jim off. We could do this all day, but they have to open the museum up in about 3 minutes. So, thank you, Jim Walsh, for coming up and talking to us today.